I was making reference the other day to an article I wrote on Substack on why I held on to my pain for 60 years. So as I reread the article, I thought, I have more to say. I want to emphasize a few points here. This is really significant, I think, for anyone when they hold themselves and do their own healing work, but also as a space holder for the people in your life and the people you serve. So here we go. Why I held on to my pain for 60 years. When holding space for yourself deepens how you hold space for others. This week, I was the client. As part of my training to become a Compassion Key Master Practitioner, I sat on the receiving end of a session, not as the guide, but as the one being guided. I chose to work on something that has followed me my entire life, the feeling of inadequacy that surfaces every time I step into something new, a new program, a new relationship, a new challenge. The nervous system fires up and suddenly I'm back in that old familiar place. You don't understand this. You never will. You are on your own. I knew exactly where it started. So I find it amazing that no matter how much time has passed and how much healing work I've done, the initial reactive response always shows up. I have learned to contain it. I've learned to acknowledge it. I have resources now I can use to shift from it, but it still shows up. In my case, each time I'm approaching something new, I feel an overload and the messages start playing in my head again. You don't understand it. You never will. You're on your own. The classroom. I was 6 years old, sitting in the front row of my first grade classroom. The teacher called on me. How much is 5 plus 5? I looked up to the left, and I remember this clearly even now, 60 years later. The exact direction my eyes moved, turning the question over in my mind, visualizing it, feeling my way toward the answer. I was pretty sure it was 10. Before I could speak, my teacher's voice cut through the room. The answer is not written on the ceiling. Something hit me in the chest. Shame moved through my body like a wave and I froze, completely froze. The word was right there, 10, and I couldn't say it. I had lost my confidence in a single moment. She waited a few more seconds, then moved to a boy at the back of the class. He said 10. I sat there. I knew it was 10. I had known it was 10. So I just want to acknowledge that we each have these moments that mark us for life. My experience is that later in life, they also become teaching moments for us, like the session I'm sharing with you here. What NLP revealed decades later. Years later, I learned something that reframed that moment entirely. Neurolinguistic programming, NLP, teaches us that we each have a primary way of processing information, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. It maps the relationship between how we think, how we feel, and how we express ourselves. And one of the things it reveals is that our eyes move in predictable directions, depending on what the brain is doing in any given moment. Looking up to the left is associated with visual memory recall, the brain reaching for something it has seen before, something it is trying to picture. That 6-year-old girl looking up to the left, she was doing exactly what her brain was designed to do. She was visualizing 5 plus 5, trying to see what 10 looked like. She wasn't lost, she wasn't slow, she wasn't avoiding the question. She was thinking in her own way, at her own pace. So I just want to say that we have to allow ourselves and each other to move at our own pace. It is so important. It is traumatizing to have to adjust at a young age to the pace of adults, and then as a teenager to the social pace, and then as adults to the pace of our workplace. Yes, we do need to learn how to adjust. True. But this is not about that. It's about who decides what that pace is. And it's always the dominant culture that dictates the pace, or whoever has the power. Back to my story. Fast forward to today. You might wonder why someone in their 60s is still working on something rooted in first grade. Because it never really left. It showed up when I left high school swearing I would never step foot in a classroom again. It showed up 15 years later when I enrolled in a PhD program in transformative learning. It showed up at the start of this training in the compassion key modality. Anything new has the potential to activate the whole cascade. The nervous system remembers. So there I was in the session, being guided back toward that original moment, the classroom, the ceiling, the shame. Ready finally to let it go, except I couldn't. Through the lens of expansive living. As I was being guided through the process of releasing the shame and pain from that original moment, something stopped me. I didn't want to let go. I paused. I turned my attention inward, trying to understand what was going on. And then, suddenly, I got it. In that classroom, when the shame moved through me and no one came, no teacher, no adult who said, "Don't rush, take all the time you need. I will help you think it through." I was left completely alone with my feelings. And those feelings, as unwelcome as they were the only ones present with me. They were the only witness to what had actually happened. Shame had stood by me when no one else did. And some part of me, without ever knowing it, had been loyal to it in return. To release it felt like abandonment, like betrayal of the only friend who had shown up for me in that moment. We spend enormous energy trying to release the things that weigh us down. We do the therapy, the journaling, the breath work, the healing retreats. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, we wonder if this particular thing is simply ours to carry forever. What if the reason it won't release is not that we haven't worked hard enough? What if we are holding on, not to the wound, but to the only witness we had in that original moment? What contracts us is not always the enemy to defeat. Sometimes it is a part of us that needs to be honored before it can release. The path through is not always force or excavation or harder effort. Sometimes it begins with dignity, with acknowledgement, a moment of genuine respect for what has accompanied us, however painfully, through a long stretch of life. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge this because this is big. We so often focus on the wound, on the hurt, on the injustice. When what is wanting attention is the only witness we had at the moment of the original wound. I know it may sound counterintuitive, but from an expansive living perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense. Stay with me, I'll get back to it in a moment. What I did instead, I stopped trying to let go, and I honored it first. I gave the shame and the pain the respect and dignity they deserved for having been my truthful and loyal companions for all these years. Not because shame had served me well, not because I was grateful for the years of self-doubt and hesitation it had seeded in me, But because it had been there, it had accompanied me, and it deserved to be acknowledged for that. The way you acknowledge anyone who has walked beside you through a long stretch of life, even if the relationship was complicated. I thanked each of them for being my witness, for being present when no one else was. And as I did, something shifted. The grip began to soften. Not all at once, slowly. The way something releases when it finally feels seen rather than fought. There was still grief in the letting go, a kind of emptiness where something familiar had lived. I honored that too. And then, and this is the part I want you to stay with, something else moved in. Not immediately, but it came. A sense of ease, of possibility. The exhale followed by an inhale that felt different, lighter, more curious than afraid. So back to why this makes sense to me from the framework of expansive living. So a foundation of the expansive living approach is that we live in a vibrational conscious universe. That means that everything is alive. So the shame that got locked into my system at age 6 is a particular constellation of energy that has been living as part of me for 60 years. And in that time, it has affected my feelings, my mental state, self-worth and confidence, and my physical being. It has been a companion, even if we would agree that it would be better not to have had it at all. But it has been living in my being. And so it deserves to be acknowledged. That's it. Just acknowledged, treated with dignity, just like anyone and anything else in our world deserves. Trees, rocks, water, animals, people, each deserves to be treated with dignity and care. Even my shame and my hurt. Try this. You might be reading this and thinking of something you have been trying to release for a long time, something you have worked on, circled back to, made progress with, and still found waiting for you. I want to offer you this not as a prescription, but as a process, a way in. So there are 4 steps here that I have laid out and want to share with you. You can put some time aside to try this out. And if you're listening on the go, then you can just follow as I read and return to this exercise at a later time. Recognition. Bring to mind the thing you keep returning to, the wound, the pattern, the feeling you thought you'd be over by now. Notice it without judgment. Let yourself say, this has been here with me for a long time. Reframe. Consider that you may not be broken for holding on to it. You may have been loyal. This pain, this shame, this fear, it was present in a moment when you were left completely alone. It witnessed what happened when no one else did. You didn't fail to release it. You honored it without even knowing that's what you were doing. Permission. You don't have to rip it out. You don't have to relive the original story or sob your way through it. You only need to acknowledge this companion for what it has been, your witness. Give it the dignity of being seen. Thank it, not for the suffering it brought, but for the loyalty it showed. Opening. In that acknowledgement, something may begin to shift. The grip softens. Not because you forced it, but because it finally felt honored enough to let go. And in the space it leaves behind, something else becomes possible. a new thought, a new feeling, a new way of moving through the very thing that used to stop you. You don't have to keep the friendship, but you can honor it before you say goodbye. And in that honoring, something that has been frozen for a very long time might finally be ready to soften. What stirs in you as you hear this? I'd love to hear what you have discovered about yourself in the process. And how does honoring your own pain deepen the way you show up for others? These conversations matter. I send your way blessings of compassionate witnessing.